Bonjour, mon ami. Today, we're going to be making Vogue 92-94 reproduction pattern from 1939. So, as usual, we're starting out with our bust darts, and then press those down, and then E-stitch at the bottom, and then moving on to the neckline. I decided that the collar shouldn't have a facing, but a bias strip rather. Alright, so I just sewed bias tape binding down until I got to the corner, and then I kind of stretched the binding so that it's sort of smooth here. And then I'm gonna continue on and see how it goes. I just thought for the sheer fabric that a facing would be too distracting from the rest of the dress. So once you sew that on and then you fold it, then you have to hand sew. I mean, you don't have to, but I just think it looks nice. And basically I used invisible stitching about 1/4 of an inch apart. Little tiny stitches, just picking up a couple of threads. And that's the end product there. So after you do that, then you sew some gathering stitches along the neckline. And then it's time to do the shoulder seams. And there's lots of different ways you can do these. French seams would be a good choice if you're doing sheer. This fabric, it's sheer, but it's not extra sheer. So I felt pretty good using my serger. And then it's time for the sleeves. There's 4 darts in each shoulder, and then there's a pleat actually lower down. You just match up the circles and then sew, and then you press that flat. And I decided to create my own trim by putting some velvet ribbon on top of lace and then zigzag stitching. Once you've gotten your lengths correct, then you measure them, line them up with the trim guide that they provide, and you have to stitch the darts in the shoulders so that it will lay properly on you. And then you pin it in place, and I found it useful to actually try it on. Disregard all that mess. But I have a piece of advice. So before you sew down the trim, make sure that you try it on, just so that you know you're going to get the most flattering angle of trim. I mean, obviously you can't change it too much or else the measurements will be off, but you can still kind of finesse it a little and just make sure that, you know, the trim isn't warped because of your boobage or lack thereof. And then the back isn't really as big of a deal. You can't even see anything. But yeah, definitely try it on, and you don't have to stitch anything up. You can just kind of hold it up. And then also you're going to want to make sure that this part right here, the middle on the front and the back, doesn't have weird like bubbling. So you're going to want to make sure that this is still on grain before you sew down your trim. So I used zigzag stitches to sew down the trim on all 4 sides, 2 on each side. And now the pattern wants you to slice down the middle between the 2 lines of stitching and then trim to the edges, but I did not think that sounded very secure, so I just cut right down the middle and then folded over once and folded over twice. And then I used a 3-step zigzag on my toile, and I hand stitched on my actual final project. So now you take the collar guide piece and you line up the inside edge of that with the stitch line, seam line on the collar itself. And then this is also another collar piece. This becomes the tie. It's one really long skinny piece of fabric. You reinforce horizontally at the large circles and you clip to them. And then you have to fold, press, and then cut away the excess. Leave a 1/4 of an inch. Except, just kidding, I realized that I pressed that part the wrong way. Luckily I could just repress. But just pay attention to your right side and your wrong sides there. So after that, then you actually stitch your normal seam allowance, 5/8 of an inch, according to the instructions. And then after you're done with that, you trim. And I've got this handy little turner, and it worked great for this. But the key for these is to just do a little bit and a little bit and a little bit and a little bit. You don't want to bunch it all up because then you can pop your stitches. Ask me how I know. But that's what you end up with. And then you can take your needle and thread and just tie off the ends. Or you could just make a little knot if you were going for a more casual look. So then you put that on the neck edge, right sides together. And then you fold over and hand stitch that in place. And again, more hand sewing. So you better like hand sewing. Now another guide piece is the pocket guide. So you will have wanted to gather the tops of the pockets according to the instructions, and then they do give you a pocket facing. I decided to omit that because of the sheer fabric. That'd be kind of weird. Back to the sleeves. So we're taking the facing for the sleeves, fold it in half, press, then you're going to want to put it around the sleeve, right sides facing, press it, and then fold it up so that the whole facing is up inside of there, and then hand stitch. And then from there, you'll want to attach the sleeves to the bodice, matching up your notches and all that stuff. I stitched it and then I did serge it, and you're gonna want to just be really careful if you serge your armholes. And then we're onto the skirt. The skirt's really simple, actually. You sew all 4 sides and leave the notch above the left-hand side open for the zipper. One more note, you're going to want to make sure that when you sew the bodice to the skirt, you don't sew over the trim. Keep that out. And now we're moving on to the pockets. So basically I just cranked up my differential feed on my serger when I did the bottom edge of the pockets, sort of to gather them without having to gather them. And I did serge all the rest of the sides too. And then I just sewed them to the lace and then hand sewed the pockets and the lace to the dress. And I didn't really do a detailed zipper insertion, but you can check out the seersucker sundress I did and you can get some more detail there. That's all there is to it. It's pretty easy. Oh, and you gotta hem it too. Ta-da! So the dress is complete. I finished it in time for my deadline with Minerva Crafts. It was pretty tight, but I did it. So I wanted to say a big, huge thank you to Minerva Crafts for sending me this fabric in exchange for a blog post. I am now on the Minerva Makers team, basically, which consists of a lot of talented people, really talented people, and I'm honored to be part of that group. And it was such a pleasure to work with them, and I love this fabric, and I can't wait to work on some more. So a quick recap of the most important things to note about this pattern, things that I changed and would recommend. One, if you're going to make it with a sheer fabric, then make sure that you change the facing at the neckline to be a bias strip, bias binding instead, because you don't want to get a big solid chunk of fabric right here. It's just kind of weird. Number two is not that. Number two is if you make the version with the trim, then make sure rather than just trimming to the edges of the lace inside, you fold over and then hand sew, or 3-step zigzag, or just zigzag depending on how your lace looks, because that will prevent the incredible Hulk moments. Number three is to try on your bodice before you stitch down the lace. Just kind of get a feel for how the trim or lace is laying on your bust. I think that was about it. I mean, there wasn't really much going on in terms of challenging or fiddly. The tie strings were a little bit fiddly, but they weren't bad. Just don't overwork your fabric. Yeah, hand wash this one. Unless you use, a more sturdy kind of fabric. If you're gonna use the inset lace, I would recommend hand washing, because every time you put it in the wash, it's gonna loosen up the stitches a little, or just stress the stitches. So hand wash. And I think that's about it. So if you decide to make Vogue 9294, please tag me on Instagram or on YouTube, whatever, at me, bro. Or join my Facebook group. I started a sewing Facebook group called Vintage Sewing with Liz. Basically, you can upload your photos and get help from the members. And I will try to help if I can, of course. I've gotten help in there because by no means am I an expert with fitting, especially. Fitting is a challenge, and they were able to help me fit some shorts that I was really kind of struggling with. So if you want some general help with projects, or just to show off, what you've made lately, then we'd love to have you along also. And that's Vintage Sewing with Liz on Facebook. And just search the group, and then you can request and I will approve it, assuming you're not a creep. And then let's see what else. Of course, you can always follow me on Instagram. I post on there pretty frequently on the stories. I try to kind of show what I'm up to in terms of sewing, or just kind of in general, but it's at Liz Von Villas. Let me know if you have any suggestions or comments, general observations. If you love it, maybe let me know. That would be nice. I really like this dress a lot. And actually now I have 2 dresses because I made the wearable muslin twill, really. So I've got 2. So yay. Let me know what kind of videos you would like to see. I did a poll recently on YouTube, my community, and it seemed like the majority of everybody wanted casual vlogs, like sewing vlogs, or project videos. So I'm glad to know that you like the sewing stuff. That's good. That's what I'm here for, mostly. But yeah, if you have a specific pattern that you really would like to see made, let me know and I might make it. If I have it, I have quite a collection of vintage reproduction patterns at this point. And pretty much almost all of the big 4 reproduction patterns that have come out, I have them. So thanks for watching, and I'm gonna sign off now, but I'll see you in the next one.